Hi, I'm Rachel Ehlers from the Legislative Analyst's office. I'm here to talk to you about a report that our office has recently released called How Small is Too Small? An Analysis of School District Consolidation. The legislature asked us to look into this issue of school district consolidation, which is basically two or more smaller school districts merging into a larger district, to see if the state should more actively promote school district consolidations. So as you can see from this figure, the state currently has a wide variety in the sizes of its school districts. Of our roughly 1,000 school districts, about 40% of them are small, serving 1,000 or fewer students, and about 10% of them are very small, serving 100 or fewer students. At the other extreme, about 2% of all districts in the state serve over 40,000 students. So there are a few reasons for this wide variety in district size. One reason that we have so many small districts is that the state has a pretty low minimum threshold for district size. Our minimum requirements are 6 students for an elementary school district and 11 students for a high school district or a unified school district. Another reason that we have such wide variety in the size of our school districts is that the state really leaves it up to local communities to decide on their district configuration. So if districts want to come together and consolidate, it has to be initiated at the local level, and a majority of the local electorate has to vote ultimately to approve the consolidation. So there are a number of arguments in favor and against district consolidation. Proponents of school district consolidation argue that bringing smaller districts together into larger districts could yield more savings, could help them operate more efficiently, and could result in better outcomes for students. On the other hand, opponents of district consolidations argue that small districts are already operating efficiently and that they offer an enhanced educational experience for students, and that in many cases they're really important components of the local communities. So we took a look at academic research on the topic, we did many interviews, and we looked at student achievement data and fiscal data for districts of different sizes to try to understand the merits of these various arguments regarding school district consolidation. We have 5 major findings in our report. The first is that small school districts do find ways to operate efficiently in many cases, but that their fiscal and personnel challenges are still pretty substantial. We found that small districts come together through creative arrangements and partnerships to try and maximize the limited dollars that they have, but that they do spend their dollars differently than larger districts. When we compared budgets for small districts to larger districts, we found that small districts, and particularly the very small districts, spend a much lower percentage of their budgets on certificated staff, that is teachers and administrators, and a much larger percentage of their budgets on overhead costs, like classified staff and maintenance operations, when we compare them to larger school districts. So our second major finding was related to student achievement. We took a look at academic research on district size, and we also took a look at California data on student achievement by district size. And we found that there are some differences. We found that mid-size school districts tend to outperform smaller districts and tend to outperform larger districts, but that the differences are pretty small. We did have some concerns in looking at the data for very small school districts, and that's because their student population sizes are so small that it's difficult for them to yield statistically significant results. And as a result, it's difficult to hold them accountable to the same degree that we do in larger school districts. It's difficult to know how students are doing in these very small school districts, particularly for specific subgroups of students that are tracked and monitored very closely in larger school districts. It's really hard to do that in these small districts because of the limitations of the data. And now our third major finding has to do with the fiscal resources available in different districts. We found that small districts receive substantially more funding per pupil than in larger districts. This is especially true for the very small districts. We found that very small districts serving 100 or fewer students get, on average, at least double the funding per pupil compared to districts that serve over 1,000 students. It's roughly $18,000 per pupil in a very small district compared to roughly $9,000 per pupil in a district of serving above 1,000 students. So this leads to our fourth major finding, which is that there are many disincentives for districts to choose to consolidate. One of them are these substantial funding advantages that the very small districts receive. If they choose to consolidate with other districts, they may have to give up some of these substantial funding advantages, which discourages them from doing so. We identify a number of other disincentives for districts to opt for consolidation, including some statutory requirements related to environmental reviews and staffing requirements. Also, other fiscal-related disincentives, additional funding losses or cost pressures that could result. And also, local preferences can be a disincentive for districts to opt for consolidation. Many local communities prefer having small districts. So our fifth major finding relates to very small schools. We found that many of the concerns we had with very small school districts also relate to very small schools, in that they receive substantial funding advantages, mostly through the necessary small school funding formula, and also that they're very hard to hold accountable for the same reasons of their small student populations, the same reasons we discussed with very small school districts. So this leads us to our recommendations. In looking at the research data as well as our own review, we did not find compelling evidence to suggest that forcing small school districts would yield substantial savings, nor that it would generate substantially better outcomes for students. And so, as a result, we're not recommending that the state actively force all small school districts to consolidate, nor that the state offer special fiscal incentives for districts to consolidate, particularly in this fiscal environment. Rather than recommending a one-size-fits-all model for school district configuration, we really default to the state's long-standing policy of letting local communities decide what's best for their district in terms of what's best for their community in terms of district configuration. However, we do think there are some important steps the state could take to encourage greater efficiencies and to improve accountability. So this figure highlights our specific recommendations. First, because of their extreme inefficiencies and concerns about accountability, we do recommend that the state increase the minimum threshold for district size to 100 students, at least 100 students. We would estimate that this would affect about 10% of districts in the state. Second, while we don't recommend that the state force all small districts to consolidate, we do think that there are things that the state could do to encourage more consolidations. This includes both removing some of the current incentives to remain small and removing some of the current disincentives to consolidate. And we have two specific recommendations for statutory changes on that related to environmental reviews and staffing requirements. And our final two recommendations relate to very small schools. We think the state should look at the necessary small school funding formula and ensure that it's really only providing additional funding to schools that are necessarily small because of their geographic isolation. And also that the state should consider whether it might want to institute a minimum size threshold for schools, for fiscal reasons, for accountability reasons, and also for the educational program that students that attend these small schools are able to access. So thanks for listening to our summary of our report on school district consolidations. To view a copy of the full report or see any other publications or materials that our office has released, please visit our website, www.lao.ca.gov. Thanks.